I returned home after spending 2 months conducting a geological field study in the Alaskan wilderness, only to find a heavy steel chain stretched defiantly across my own driveway. A spotless white placard was drilled straight into the bark of my century-old pine, its letters crisp and official-looking. "Welcome to Silver Ridge Community. Unauthorized entry, $500 fine." Standing proudly beneath the sign was a woman sporting what could only be described as a beauty pageant sash, its gold lettering boldly declaring, "Board President." She gripped an oversized megaphone that seemed absurd for the few yards separating us. "Sir, you can't camp here. This is Silver Ridge property. Leave now or law enforcement will be contacted," she blared, her voice bouncing off the trees. I looked past her toward my cedar cabin, the one my grandfather built by hand, and the 40 acres of untouched meadow that had belonged to my family for 3 generations. For a second, I wondered if exhaustion or altitude had scrambled my senses. "Camp?" "Ma'am," I said evenly. "I've been paying taxes on this stretch of land for 15 years. My name's Elias Trent. I'm a geologist, more comfortable around granite, outcrops than neighborhood councils, and I take my coffee black while watching the creek that cuts behind my cabin." The place she stood on was Hollow Creek Basin, just beyond the official edge of Marin Township, Colorado. My newfound adversary introduced herself as Clara Winton, self-proclaimed matriarch of Silver Ridge Community Association, a suburban enclave that had apparently sprouted like invasive ivy too, ridgelines east of my land while I'd been gone. I had bought the property years back from an old cattleman named Roy Danner, who'd tossed a weathered box of hand-drawn maps and yellowed deeds into the deal, along with a cryptic warning. "Watch out for folks who think bylaws make them gods of the mountain." I'd laughed it off then, certain my cabin sat far beyond the reach of any clipboard-wielding committee. But while I'd been knee-deep in frozen soil samples up north, Silver Ridge had multiplied, across the hills with all the subtlety of a shopping complex overnight. They'd transformed the entrance of their subdivision into something that looked straight out of a pretentious travel brochure. Towering mailbox pillars shaped like shrunken Greek temples lined the road. An oversized electronic gate guarded the main street, its keypad carved in the shape of an oak leaf that actually played a tinny version of Mozart whenever someone punched in the wrong code. Not long after, I began receiving copies of a glossy magazine wedged into my mailbox titled The Homefront Ledger, their self-congratulatory newsletter filled with charts about rising property values and endless editorials about community pride. Tucked between the pages were violation notices for parcels of land they didn't even own. Then came the real madness, their so-called territorial expansion initiative. A fantasy so absurd it would make a medieval baron blush. Clara Winton and her council of clipboard loyalists had apparently decided that Hollow Creek Basin, my land, was now an open recreational zone, citing what they called traditional neighborhood usage. Their neighborhood wasn't even old enough for its paint to have faded. The only historic visitors here had 4 legs and antlers. They began stapling HOA flyers to my aspen trunks as if the forest itself were their bulletin board. They bolted cork message boards to my fence posts and started handing out laminated visitor passes to random day hikers who wanted to fish in my stream, charging them $20 apiece for something called trail upkeep donations. It got worse. One morning, I spotted a small, motion-activated camera mounted right above my porch light. Its label read, "Silver Ridge Security, Smile for Safety." Not long after, I discovered fluorescent survey stakes jammed into my meadow, each tagged with future walking path. From above, they spelled out the letters SR, a self-congratulatory monogram for Silver Ridge Estates. Their hired landscapers showed up uninvited one afternoon, sculpting my wild rose bushes into lopsided cubes that looked like they were mid-panic attack. They took a chainsaw to 3 of my heirloom apple trees, the ones my grandfather grafted himself, because, as their note later claimed, they were non-compliant cultivars. Then came the final insult. Solar-powered accent lights installed along my driveway without permission. Taped to my front door in a weatherproof sleeve was an invoice, sealed with branded Shea tape. That read, Beautification Services, $100. Payment due within 30 days. Late fees accrue at 20% monthly. I replied with a single-word email. No. 7 minutes later, a formal letter from Clara hit my inbox. More to the point, I don't take orders from anyone who wears a sash, keeps a gavel in her handbag, and pretends to rule over ground she doesn't own. The board doubled, down on their fantasy by filing, something they called an annexation plat at the county clerk's office, a map so bold it actually included my land inside their boundaries, as if I were some ornamental tree they'd just decided to landscape around. They even scheduled a ribbon-cutting ceremony for their new Hollow Creek Heritage Trail, complete with press coverage and local influencers snapping photos beside borrowed scenery. At the event, Clara Winton, wearing a sun hat wide enough to generate its own microclimate, told a lifestyle blogger that isolated parcels like Mr. Trent's are better managed by those who value aesthetics and community cohesion. That night, simmering with disbelief, I dug out the old cardboard box Roy Danner had given me when I bought the property. Inside was a weathered manila envelope I'd never opened. The contents smelled faintly of dust and linseed oil, a 1908 land patent embossed with raised seals, a surveyor's field ledger filled with hand-sketched boundaries, and most crucially, a conservation easement recorded 2 decades ago with an addendum I'd previously skimmed and forgotten. The fine print hit like thunder. The deed granted me senior water rights for the entire basin, and a permanent access covenant that extended the full length of the valley, slicing straight through the eastern lots that Silver Ridge had so proudly claimed. In simple terms, I didn't just own my land outright, I owned the legal backbone of the valley itself. The next morning, I marched into the county recorder's office with that stack of yellowing papers, feeling like a gunslinger walking through swinging doors. The clerk typed up Silver Ridge's filing, stared at the screen, and made the face of someone who'd just taken a sip of orange juice expecting coffee. Their so-called plat map had no legitimate signatures. The property descriptions had been copied verbatim from some hiking blog about the area. Even the listed roads existed only in their imagination. Within minutes, the county attorney flagged the document for potential fraudulent conveyance. I called my lawyer. My lawyer called a title company. The title company called their insurer. Within hours, an emergency compliance meeting was on the books. Meanwhile, I spent the afternoon walking the property line, laminating copies of my deed and zip-tying one to every single HOA stake they'd driven into my soil. On each one, in thick black marker, I wrote a simple note. Private land documented, recorded, enforced. Remove your markers from my private land. Final legal warning. That was the message I sent. Clara's response? Marching a so-called trail enhancement crew straight onto my property, armed with rollers and paint cans. They started spraying bright reflective arrows onto my rocks, the kind used for highway medians, as if my meadow were a public park. I called the sheriff's office on the spot. The deputy who arrived took one look at Clara, sighed, and muttered, Again? We were just here last month for the mailbox incident. Then he leafed through my stack of documents, raised his eyebrows high, and immediately reached for his radio. Dispatch, send a supervisor, he said. When the day of their grand ribbon cutting finally arrived, Clara went all out. She showed up with a pair of absurd, gold-plated scissors that looked like something from a children's cartoon, a red velvet rope to mark off VIP zones and on my land, and a professional photographer she dramatically introduced as the Silver Ridge Association historian. To top it off, she unveiled a 3-tiered cake decorated with fondant hikers and edible trees. The words Hollow Creek Heritage Trail written in elegant icing. While she was busy staging her little coronation, I arrived with reinforcements. When the county attorney arrived, portable court, recorder in tow, he cut straight to the point. Mrs. Winton, can you verify who signed these annexation documents? Clara hesitated, her confidence evaporating. Our vendor managed all the paperwork, she said, voice trembling. That vendor, it turned out, was her cousin Trent Marlowe, a man whose sole business credential was owning a vinyl-cutting machine and a willingness to moonlight as an amateur document forger. What followed hit faster than a spring landslide. The county voided the bogus annexation on the spot, citing the Silver Ridge Board for filing fraudulent instruments, criminal trespass, and unauthorized construction within a protected riparian corridor. Both Clara and Trent were referred to the district attorney for prosecution. Their insurance carrier promptly issued a dense, 10-page letter that read like a graduate-level law textbook on why fraudulent acts void coverage entirely. Then came the judgment. A county judge ordered Silver Ridge Association to pay triple damages for every beautification project they'd carried out on my property, plus $150,000 in penalties for violating the conservation easement. At the next board meeting, the vote to remove Clara was 31-0. A few members even clapped when the tally was announced. Her sentence, 2 years probation, $50,000 in personal restitution, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board in the state. Trent was sentenced to 300 hours of community service, specifically tasked with pulling up the same survey stakes he had illegally driven into my meadow. In the courtroom, Clara stood frozen, mouth opening and closing soundlessly, like a trout gasping at the surface while the judge read her sentence aloud.